Thank you for coming today to participate in the Juneteenth conversation on our continued struggle for emancipation. So Juneteenth and our emancipation, this is a conversation that I am constantly having with my friends and my family members and business partners and people internationally that I'm connecting with. Our conversation right now is, where are we as Black people? So this conversation is super timely, and I'm really honored to be here to help to facilitate and moderate it. Many of you may be familiar with the concept of Sankofa. Can you raise your hand if you're familiar with that concept? Beautiful. I bring that up because it's a Ghanaian concept that tells us that as we're moving forward, it's important that we pause and look back to see where we've been and where we come from. So today is an opportunity for us to pause and look and see where we've been, and then talk about where we're going. As African Americans, as Indigenous folks, as people of color, whose ancestors were kidnapped and forced into chattel slavery, the process of looking back can be really emotional. It can be really complex, but it's something that we have to do in order to be clear on where we're going, right? So, Elisa reminded me yesterday when we were talking that when we look back at our journey, that it's not all bad, right? We have a lot to be proud of. We have so much to be proud of because we as Black people, as people in this country, are brilliant people who have survived, we've thrived, we have created, we've innovated, and we've continued and continued and continued, and we have never given up. So we want to keep that in mind as we are having this conversation today about Juneteenth. Before we get started, it's important that we practice our true African traditions. So I want to take a moment to ask the elder in the room for permission to speak. And I'm going to need your help and support in establishing who our elder in the room is, okay? So respectfully, I want you to raise your hand if you are older than 40 years old. Okay, thank you. I want you to raise your hand if you are older than 50 years old. Okay, I'm putting my hand down on that one, but I'll be there. I want you to raise your hand if you are older than 60. Wonderful. Okay, so we have two. And how old are you, Baba?
60.
60. Hey, happy birthday. Yeah. And how old are you, Baba?
79.
Hey, okay now. So we have established who our elder in the room is, and I just want to take a moment to tell you that today we're going to discuss Juneteenth and its significance. Together, we're going to really look at our path towards emancipation, and our hope and our intention is to inform and inspire. So with that, do we have your permission to proceed?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. So let me take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Rafina Jones, and I am a mother of two beautiful boys who are next year going to be in middle school at John Adams Middle School. I am a mother. I'm a resident of the city of Santa Monica. We've been here since 2017. We live in the Pico neighborhood where the Juneteenth Festival this Saturday will be located. Raise your hand if you plan to go to the Juneteenth Festival. Yeah. And I'm also an employee of the city of Santa Monica. So for many years, I was on the team that operated the 4 markets. I was the education coordinator for the youth programs. I handled all the financial components for the 4 markets, and I was also the liaison for the food assistance programs. Now I'm currently in the finance departments, and I train staff and departments on how to use new financial software. So that's a little bit about me. But as Dr. Amina is going to let you know, I am a performance artist. And that's what I do. That's what I do. That's what I was sent here to do, right? So I work for the city of Santa Monica because we got bills to pay, right? But my soul says when a drum plays Get Up and Dance. And that's a direct connection in honor of my ancestors. So any style of diasporic dance where there's a drum playing, whether it's West African, Afro-Cuban, Afro-Brazilian, Afro-Haitian is where I began. Actually, I began in the church and at home with soul music and hip hop and gospel and all that. But that's who I am. Born in LA. We left LA right when crack was hitting in the 80s and gangs were getting out of control. We left and went to the Inland Empire, and then I went to college in Oakland. So I'm super hella California. Okay. And my family's from the South. My father is from Tennessee. His line is from Tennessee, and my mother's line is from Alabama by way of Ohio. So that is who I am. As we get started on this event, I want to take a moment to say that this event is brought to you by CommUNITY, which is a City of Santa Monica recognized affinity group for staff who identify as Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Can I get a woo woo if you're part of a member of the... Yeah, okay. So CommUNITY would like to thank everyone for joining us live and in person and even on playback once this recording is available later. We want to thank all the individuals and departments at the City of Santa Monica who have volunteered their time and expertise to create this event. Special thanks to the City Manager's Office. Woo woo. Can we get a woo woo? Okay. Let us know who you are. A special thanks to the Racial Equity Committee. All right. And the Santa Monica Alliance of White Anti-Racists. Come on now, we got our people in here. And the last one, the Office of Sustainability and the Environment. Okay, because you're taking care of all of our homes. We want to say a special shout out to Bridget Cade and Delana Benakama for working behind the scenes to make this event happen. We also want to thank Brandy Lockhart and Sheila Shabazi. We got this woo-woo thing going. And we want to acknowledge our local vendors that we want you first to buy something from if they're selling something outside. We want you to tag them on. Yeah. Come on. Do we have other vendors in here? Okay. Okay. So they're outside. So buy something from them. Tag them on your social media posts. Get their information for the future so that you can, when you're sitting on a committee and you need to think of somebody to bring to another event, you can recommend them because we want to support Black businesses, right? Woo woo. Okay. So the businesses are Affirmation Effect, Tagana Wellness, Dr. Todd Guant, and Cafe Rousseau will be providing refreshments and pastries at the end of this event. Last but not least, we want to thank you all for coming out to participate in a Juneteenth event here in the city of Santa Monica. There's going to be a 15 to 30 minute Q&A session at the end. So if you have questions or comments, please make sure you write them down so you have those to make at the end. And we want to acknowledge the first people of this ancestral and unceded land of Kuravunga that we now know as Santa Monica. We honor their elders, past and present, and the Yavitam descendants who are part of the Gabrieleno, and Tongva people. So we want to honor the people of this land, but in our African traditions, whenever we begin an event like this or a ceremony or a gathering, and we are conscious of our practices, we always begin by pouring libations. Raise your hands if you're familiar with the practice of pouring libations. Okay, good. I'm glad I brought this up. Okay. When we pour libations, we take a minute to remember and bring to our memory our ancestors, right? Those of us who came before us, because without them, we would not be here. And so when we pour our libations, and we talk about our ancestors, we can acknowledge those from our bloodline, our milk line, and our spirit line. Our bloodline are those who we were born, who gave birth to us, right? So our matrilineal line, our patrilineal line, those who were related to by blood. Our milk line are those that were not related to, but those who played a significant role in raising us, right? In teaching us. And those ancestors are really important. Lastly, our spirit line are people that we didn't know directly, but have made a significant impact on our lives. And so when we pour our libations, we're honoring those from our bloodline, our milk line, and our spirit line. And I got that from my good sister friend Giovanni Washington, Dr. Giovanni Washington, who has the Black Goddess Within Oracle deck. So look her up on Instagram. All right, so let's meet our panelists. You guys ready to meet our panelists? Okay, now I can sit back. I am so excited. I'm so excited to have this conversation because, like I said, this conversation of where we are as Black people and where we have been as Black people is really the theme of my life in all the ways. So to be asked, thank you, Brandy, to be invited to moderate this conversation is absolutely an honor for me. And I'm looking forward to a really good conversation. So I want to introduce to you, oh, this sounds so much better. I want to introduce to you Dr. Amina Humphrey. Raise your hand, Dr. Amina. Yes, yes. She is a teacher, scholar, artist, and researcher who has over 25 years of experience. Her list is impressive, and I encourage you to follow her on social media. Some areas that she has experience in includes race, ethnic studies, African American studies, visual and performing arts. She's actually going to have an exhibit this Saturday at the Juneteenth Festival. Gender studies, media studies, qualitative research, action research, culturally responsive, sustainable teaching and learning, curriculum instruction, and special education. She does a lot. She is a Ford Fellow 1 time, a Fulbright recipient 2 times, fellow Fulbright. If you're a Fulbright, say woo woo, woo woo. And she's a UCLA alumna. She was a member of one of the first cohorts of graduate students in the 90s to study critical race theory and education at UCLA and the Graduate School of Education. So we'll definitely ask about that. So everyone, welcome Dr. Amina. Our next panelist is Kyle T. Williams, who representing the masculine, the divine masculine. Let's always have that energy. He was born and raised in South Central LA during the 1980s. He is a bridge millennial, like myself, meaning he was born between 1980 and 1989. And he sits on the cusp between millennials and Gen Xers. He's a graduate of Westchester High and has an undergraduate degree in geography from Cal Poly Pomona and an MPA from Cal State Northridge. Professionally, Kyle is a senior geographic information systems analyst with the LA County Department of Parks and Rec. His primary motivation is rehabilitating and reclaiming LA's urban parklands while bringing technology and programming to often overlooked rural areas. He's a board member of the equestrian NGO Urban Saddles. He loves horses, hiking, geography. He values hard work and is super passionate about today's renaissance of African American history. So, Kyle Williams. And lastly, we have Dr. Elisa Oshunfonke Ordunya, who I lovingly call Iya. She used to work for the city of Santa Monica. It's the Ocean Funky. Okay. Dr. Elisa holds a PhD and a master's in depth psychology with a specialization in community, liberation, indigenous, and eco psychology from the Pacifica Graduate Institute. She's a former homelessness policy analyst with the city of Santa Monica. She used to be employed with us. And she's a strategic advisor to local governments and many, many others. So she understands firsthand how past public policies and social service systems have caused harm to multiple communities, leaving legacies of social division, hierarchies of power, segregation, and loss of autonomy. She's a depth psychologist, researcher, a community engagement facilitator, and a writer. And she's dedicated to addressing the national racial reckoning and homelessness crisis. So this is our panel for today, you guys. Can you welcome? Okay, I done talked enough. It's y'all turn. Okay. So what brings us here today? Juneteenth, right? How many of you guys before the pandemic practiced or celebrated Juneteenth? Raise your hands. Yeah. So less than half. My hand is down too because I had heard about Juneteenth maybe the last 10 years or so. We were aware as a family that something happened around Juneteenth. We didn't know what day it was. And we knew that folks in the South had a practice of Juneteenth or a celebration of Juneteenth. Hey, can you tell where she's from? And so I want to ask Dr. Amina first, let's just set the tone. Let's talk about the significance of the day. And for those who don't know, what is Juneteenth? And why is it important?
Okay, may I stand?
Yes. Y'all know she an artist, right? I told you that. She about to give you some.
So I am from down south, and I have written a poem for this day.
You need the mic.
I'm not going to use the mic.
Oh, okay.
I've written a poem for this day in honor of Juneteenth, and it's called Sensing Juneteenth, the Arkansas Childhood Edition, with a sprinkling of Los Angeles, California.
Mm-hmm.
Juneteenth tastes like grandmother's red velvet cake, ribs and red soda water, baked beans, cherries, strawberry, and that watermelon. Red in remembrance of the blood and the suffering. Juneteenth smells like vanilla flavor, oak wood chips simmering on the barbecue, collard greens, hot water cornbread, and some sweet iced tea.
Mm-hmm.
Juneteenth is seeing that bird in the sky and saying, I'm free, just like you, soaring on a prayer, the hope for a new day. Juneteenth is the touch of homecoming from loved ones, no longer separated. Juneteenth is hearing Mama Africa's talking drum and seeing Santa Monica's own Miss Jones as she manjanis her way down the celebratory dance line. Come on, somebody up in here, give it a shout. The day is near, it's Juneteenth. And it feels like Parliament and Funkadelic on Hump Day. Earth, Wind, and Fire on Thursday. James Brown on Friday. Soul Train on Saturday, and the sounds of blackness, Mahalia Jackson and Aretha Franklin on Sunday.
Come on now.
It feels like rain in a drought. It feels like eating high on the hog on Sundays. It feels like food, fun, and fellowship, my friend Ronnie. It feels like seeing Africa for the very first time. It feels like Earth Day, Born Day, and Birthday. It feels like the ancestors smiling from the sky above and saying, job well done. It feels like this. Now you tell me, what does your freedom taste like, smell like, see like, touch like, hear like? Juneteenth is me and it is you. Now you tell me, what is your sense of Juneteenth? On January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all persons held as slaves within rebel states are henceforward shall be free. June 1865 is an important date. Union troops arrived in Galveston, Texas with the news of freedom. Hallelujah up in here. How did it feel like? What did it taste like? This is the day that the last remaining Africans enslaved in the United States learned about their freedom. It is roughly 2.5 years after President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Juneteenth is American history. How did they feel?
Thank you, Dr. Amina. So y'all know what Juneteenth is now? You know what it feel like, taste like, smell like? All right. So thank you so much for just bringing the creativity, Dr. Amina, to just give us the feel of what it feels like and painting the picture of what it looks like. Yeah. And so as what was it, last year, 2 years ago, it became a federal holiday, Juneteenth. And our country continues to change, right? Initially, for this event, CommUNITY, the affinity group that was throwing this event, wanted to screen the 1619 Project for Juneteenth. And how many of you are familiar with 1619 Project? Okay, so a majority of you. So essentially, the work of the 1619 Project reframes the way we look at American history by saying the nation didn't start when we got our independence from Britain. Rather, it started when the first group of Africans who were enslaved arrived onto these shores. There were lesson plans that were developed as a part of the 1619 Project in partnership with the Pulitzer Center, with the intention of teaching this reframed vision of our history in the schools. Immediately, it was met with resistance. We see this type of resistance with critical race theory as well, which persists to this day. I feel like I can't turn on the news, which I barely watch. I can't turn on the news without hearing some resistance to critical race theory. So we know that, Dr. Amina, you have some extensive study in critical race theory. And I want to know, can you open the conversation with telling us, first of all, what is critical race theory? And why is there so much resistance throughout the country to teaching this history?
Well, critical race theory has several tenets. And I think when listening to you speak and thinking about where we are as a country, it also presents the truth from the perspective of people of color. And so to give you an example, one tenet of critical race theory is race and racism are endemic in American society. And so another tenet says that the voices and experiences of BIPOC people, right, are very important, and we should start there in the center with using those voices and experiences. So critical race theory is going to present another side of history that differs from the typical canon. It's going to differ from what you receive probably in your textbooks used in public schools. So with that said, to give you an example, I remember a few years ago, one of the textbooks happened to say slaves were farmers, and that suggests pay. And that's a revisionist history. Another perspective is, no, they were not farmers. They were chattel slaves, property, the equivalent of a pig or a cow. The Constitution didn't even consider them to be human. So when you have that framework, you have to ask, why aren't textbooks teaching that history, that true history, and why is that narrative still continuing? So critical race theory challenges these dominant discourses and ideologies, and it puts people of color's voices and experiences at the front. So I think that's why there's some of the backlash, particularly in some of the former slaveholding states where I'm from. So I hope that answers some of your question.
Thank you. Yeah, property. Yeah. Kyle, so if critical race theory is us reframing or a relook at our history, right? And looking at how racism is a part of our system and so many systems within our country. That's one thing. But when we were emancipated and we left the plantations with the clothes on our back, we also left with an identity, right? At that time, we had a certain view of who we were. We knew our families, we knew the people that we were with. But now I'm becoming interested in how, since emancipation, how today, 150 years later, our people's names and classification, our race and ethnicity has arrived at this Black or African American box. We're so much more than that. But today we're being told, or we're essentially only given one box to check as Black, but we're so much more. Our history, we know from our history that there was a lot of rape that happened that affected our bloodlines, that are a part of our bloodlines. Since we were emancipated, there's also been a lot of interracial marriage and relationships that came out of love. And so that's part of our bloodline. But there's also scholars and people now really focusing on the our indigenous roots. And I actually see, I don't know if you see this, but on social media, I've seen a number of pictures of really well-known African-American people, artists, put side by side with a darker skinned indigenous Native American person. And this is asking the question about our bloodlines, who we truly are. So when we left the plantation, right, after emancipation, we then had a sense of who we were. And now 150 years later, we're told just to focus on being Black and checking that box, Black, African American. Can you talk a little bit about who we are and how we've been led to identify ourselves?
Oh, yes, thank you. That's a wonderful question. Identity is at the root of who we are. And identifying with your ancestors, and as you said, bloodline, is as old as humanity itself. I will say today there is a great change for those of us who are of a multiracial descent, because there are more than one boxes, but it's only just as maybe like more than one or two or more, you know? And in the modern context today, we're looking at a lot of data. So that's what you have to kind of take into account. What does this data, how is this data used, and what is this data going to bring forth in the future? So I, again, as someone who is multiracial and someone who has a background of everyone you mentioned in your introduction, all of my ancestors, from the ones that were brought here and the ones that were forced to work and the ones that were first here and the ones that were the enslavers. All of my ancestors were here prior to 1776. So I like to say that, you know, in the modern time, when it comes to just checking a box, you should check the box of the group that needs the most representation, because it's really just a matter of data. So you should take the emotions out of that in regards to checking the box. And it's something that should be dwelling inside of you. Again, I know who my ancestors are. I can go and have a spiritual moment at the site, the monuments for the 1811 slave rebellion. My people were there. I can go and have a moment in nature as my native ancestors did, and I can go ahead and rock out to some Led Zeppelin like, my European ancestors. It's a matter of identity lives within you. It's not something someone's supposed to put upon you or find out there in the nebulous world from some shadowy figure. It comes from your ancestors and your blood, and something that comes from within. And so go forth with that.
And I do want to open it up to other panelists. If there's something that you want to say, if you want to add, if you want to bounce off of other comments, you're encouraged to. Okay. So yeah, this question of which box do we check? How do we identify ourselves? When we look at our family history, I don't know about y'all, but when I have a whole wall full of ancestors' pictures, and we're all different shades. I mean, even on this stage, we're all different shades, skin tones, hair textures, everything, but we're all told to check the same box or the same boxes. And I feel like it eliminates so much of our story.
I would say again, the story that we're telling is bigger than a box, of course, but the box is a symbol of unity. Just as we are all different shades, we are one people. And I see you and see that your hair is kind of different than mine, so you got some differentness in me, and you're a different shade than me. So there's something different there, and that's your own story. And that's what makes us beautiful. And that leads me to come and talk to you about that. Or you come and talk to me about why I wear my hair this way or why I dress this way. But again, if we don't have a sense of unity, then we have nothing. And then we're just a bunch of individuals talking about why my hair is this way and your hair is that way, I really believe that when it comes to just checking the box, you should check that black box. You really should. Again, as someone who looks at the data and works with the data on a regular basis, there's big data now. We're talking like the way data is managed is huge, huge, and in the way that it affects us in the social aspect, this is how programs are made. So, think about it this way: if we can check multiple boxes, right? They also have that option. And then there's an option where it's just one or two.
And
but
I think the discussion of freedom of how we identify ourselves as people of African descent, as Indigenous people, as people of color, it brings into question, the freedom to identify ourselves. I want to direct the conversation to the word emancipation, right? Because I find that Juneteenth, right, we're celebrating the day that enslaved Africans in Texas found out that Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation 2.5 years before. And so we hear the word emancipation, and I tend to think liberation, right? All the slaves were free, right? I think that's what you hear. Emancipation Proclamation, that meant that all the slaves were set free. And I just want to dive into the definition for a second so that we're clear what we're talking about. So Dr. Elisa, can you just talk to us a little bit about emancipation, liberation? Are we both? Are we neither? Where are we today?
Good question. And I'll defer to my colleague here, so I'll just tell the meaning of what it means to me. Emancipation is more of a technical piece. It's more like policy or government that says we are ending the period of slavery or we are freeing people that were enslaved. What's more important to me are concepts of freedom and liberation. And even in the question around the check box, even throughout that time, and this is just through studying my own family history, dad's side from Kentucky, mom's side, deep South, Mississippi, two totally different experiences. My dad's side of the family were able to keep their family together somehow, and we're trying to learn how they did that. Mom's side, a lot of separation and readoption and reconfiguration of family, a lot of rape and things like that happen. So when I think, though, of the family stories and the stories that were passed on, especially around the kitchen table at holidays or Sundays, and the joy, the laughter, the way people who wrote poetry or whatever, the ways that people survived through that taught me that they maintained a will to live. And so their minds were liberated in a sense that even if their bodies were in carceral conditions, their mind, their spirituality was able to go through. And I think it's so important because to even think about the box as a limitation of how you identify is a sign that your mind is still a little bit colonized, that you haven't gone through the process of really discovering and getting to know who you are. And I think that's a process. It's done in community dance classes. It's, culture groups. It is sitting down with elders. And I know we had this talk, I forgot, someone brought it up and it just made me think about, I think you did, Kyle, of families and knowing your family history. And it hurts me today where people don't even know their grandparents. Someone had beef in their family, so now two sides aren't talking, and now the children they don't know who they are. I remember we had a place in Inglewood called Callie Rose, and it was just kind of this literary spot where people could just come and be. And it was around the time of Trayvon Martin and Michael, I'm blanking, in Missouri, were killed. And he's like, it was a young black man was coming in for tutoring. He's like, well, what hope do I have? Why do I continue? And I was like, who's in your family? What are your family stories? How did your family get to the point where you are alive today? And he hadn't talked to his grandparents. And so over the next couple of weeks, he, somehow got his mom, I guess, to introduce him or sit down and talk with his grandparents. And he found out I think it was his grandmother, integrated one of the schools. And I was like, you're carrying this in your bloodline, in your DNA. That wasn't easy for her. And so I just think liberation and freedom to me are separate than what anyone tells us. I think it begins with our purpose on planet. I think it begins with our spirituality. I think it's a conscious decision to, even in painful situations, I'm not saying go back to trauma, but to find ways to heal so that you can know who you are. I think that's the most important thing, and that's something that no one could take away from you.
Beautiful.
If I quite got it.
Yeah, beautiful. Anybody else want to share anything?
I just want to go back to the previous question about identity.
Yeah.
And
It's a popular one. Check the box. I didn't know who knew. I know.
Stephen Jay Gould in The Mismeasure of Man talked about race as a social construction, right? And so we're all human beings, but we know how that plays out in sociological terms, right? When it comes to applying for a loan,
Yeah.
getting a home,
Yeah.
and other. The list goes on and on. And as I thought about that question of identity, it's interesting when you say African American, because you look at me and I have all of that in the family. We have Native American, well, we have white, right? But when you look at me, most people mistake me from the continent, and I'm just fine with that. I love it. Black is beautiful. I'm proud of this blackness. But I will tell you, growing up in the Deep South, there were issues with light-skinned privilege. In my family, it's better to be light-skinned than to look like this. So as a young child, I grappled with the idea of what does it mean to be black and proud in a family, in a community that sometimes despised how I looked. So for me, at a young age, I grew up knowing in the Deep South, you are black. But as I came into my identity, even more and more, I wanted to know, what does blackness mean in this context? What does it mean in the African diaspora? And so literature and traveling to different places through the word was very instrumental for me as a young child growing up, to visit far places through literature, to understand about the culture of Africa, and that it was nothing to be ashamed of to have dark skin and so-called nappy hair. I call it that good hair.
That's right. Yeah, I tell this story of recently visiting Barbados, right? And sitting in a room full of people, and they were all mostly Bayesian people, and there was me and another person from the States. And we were talking about dating and dating outside of your race. And one of the gentlemen said, you know, I wouldn't necessarily date out of my race, but he pointed to me and the other woman. And he said, but I would date someone who's mixed. And I was like, who are you pointing at? Am I mixed? Right? But for the population in Barbados that doesn't have the same, you know, mixture that we have here, it makes it clear like, oh, I do have a lot going through my veins. I do have a lot in my history. And then you look at that panel of ancestors and there's all shades. So it's something to really look at, right? Who are we and how are we told to identify? Now, one thing, yes, ma'am.
All right, it doesn't quite answer, but I'm so glad you said what you said, Dr. Amina, because, and I would speak as kind of the lightest one up here, colorism is still a real thing, and we have to own our privilege. So it's like in situations of you know, it's unearned, you know, attributes that are given to you, and I hear sometimes, you know, other people that are light-skinned say, well, what about the history of how we got here? Yeah, that's it, but it's separate from it. It's like when you walk into a store today, when the police pull you over today, when you go apply for that job, I just want to say we have to do better at acknowledging it, and we have to also step out the way and make room and understand that. So I just wanted to point that out today.
Thank you. Because we have the solutions, right? There's a lot of work internally that we have to do. It's so easy to point outside of our community and say, you know, what people are doing to us, but it's also important for us to do the work within ourselves, right? So thank you for saying that. You know, one place where I don't hear about colorism or one area of society is Black men and their interaction with the police, right? I don't think colorism exists there too much, right? So I bring this up because I'm the mother of two young, beautiful Black boys who I'm raising into beautiful Black men. And I am absolutely nervous about living in this society, even though we live in Santa Monica. In their educational institutions, they're still treated differently. And I see it and I hear it, right? And at some point, I talked to one of the diversity administrators in the school district, and he pointed out that around the second grade, Black boys are no longer seen as cute. They are seen as a threat. And I have a 6th grader and an 8th grader now. And so this is a very important topic to me. And, you know, I want to ask Kyle, as the representation of the divine masculine on this stage, you know, we think back to 2020 when the world stopped, right? You remember the entire world stopped. Why? Because George Floyd was murdered. And we all had an opportunity to see the injustice and the hatred. And it was a modern day lynching. And so I was really inspired and proud of the country and the world because we saw everywhere that people stopped and said, no, we're not down with that. But as a Black woman who was born and raised in this country, I had this suspicion, how long is this going to last? And here we are in 2023, and has it lasted? And so I want to just bring this conversation to our brother Kyle and ask you, as a Black man, what is your assessment of how the nation has responded to the promises made following George Floyd's murder?
Well, I would say my assessment of the situation is pretty bleak. I feel like we watched a man, as you said before, a public lynching. We watched a man being murdered, and then it was crammed down our throat 24 hours a day for X amount of months. So that leads to an incredible amount of trauma and feelings, you know what I mean? But honestly, I feel like nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. After that situation, I was wrongfully put in handcuffs, and nothing happened. Nothing, outcry from any, what do we call them, allies, that were there. I feel as though, again, nothing has changed. I think to kind of tie it back to the previous question of emancipation versus liberation, while we have been emancipated in the legal sense, we are still under the yoke of a very racist system. And, it's not going to get changed with poems and dancing and sitting down. If you're scared for your son, if you're truly scared for your son, we all need to be standing up on the front line for real material change and real political power and real policy change. I feel like we've been given a lot of empty promises. We have the only fruition I've seen is Juneteenth.
That's one of them. We got a holiday.
Yeah, we got a holiday, but it's like you ask your boss for a raise and they give you a pizza party. That, and again, to go to the original question, the first question of Juneteenth, as a bridge millennial, and from LA, we didn't have Juneteenth at all. We didn't have no idea what this was. So when we get it, I get it as a 30-plus-year-old man when I just watched my brother get murdered on television 800 times a day. It's like, thanks, but no thanks. I'll go party it up with everyone. That sounds great, but I'm scared. But they want you to be scared, so I'm not really scared. No, you just have to be aware of things. But again,
Yeah.
I feel like nothing has changed. And as someone, I've been to my ancestral plantation as well. And again, nothing has changed. It's only expanded. That's where we are now. So,
I was gonna ask in the audience of the Black men in the room, how many have been wrongfully detained, handcuffed, imprisoned, accused, ... But Black men in the audience are quite a minority. But I do want to ask, of the three, if you are okay with raising your hand, have you in your lifetime been wrongfully pulled over, accused, harassed, handcuffed? He put up 2 hands. So that's 2 out of 3. And how old are you? 20. Okay. Now, does that say something that my immediate response was, oh, okay, you're doing good.
just hasn't happened yet.
It just hasn't happened yet.
Don't worry.
Right?
Again, I just told you, mine just happened in my 30s. Get ready. I know people that it didn't happen to them. They were much older, but it's coming for you. There's a great documentary.
I mean, it's real.
But
it's real.
When you think about it in numbers and statistics, any man in this country is statistically more likely to be put in prison than anybody else in the world. It's just a matter of numbers, brother. And because we're a racist nation, the target is on our back, So
let's look at the numbers. So all the other men in the room, can you raise your hand if you have been wrongfully detained, accused, handcuffed by the police? Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Just an observation. So let's go back for a second. We're going to go back to Go Forward, Sankofa. So we were talking about emancipation and liberation, and I did look up the definition of emancipation. So it is the transferring control of ownership of one party to another. So in the case of Emancipation Proclamation, the act was actually transferring ownership of Black lives from white owners to the Black people themselves, right? So the question is, are we emancipated, right? And then liberation is the lifting of constraints from social and political economic oppression. So the day, June 19th, 1865, right, when the enslaved Africans in Texas were told that actually you guys are free, they were emancipated, but they were a long way from liberation. And the question is today, are we emancipated? Are we liberated? I do want to, let's go forward a little bit. So to talk about the police, right, and what has happened since George Floyd was murdered, I did some research. So there's a couple of things that have happened, right? Police accountability. We know the police were imprisoned, so they were indicted and sentenced to prison. There's been some police reform laws, so some officers aren't allowed to use the no-knock warrants. They're required to use body cams, and there was a widespread defund the police campaign. We said we have the Juneteenth holiday, so here we are. And reparations. Reparations is in the news now. Baba's laughing, right? So let's talk about reparations, panel. This is open to everybody. It's a hot topic. Do you think we're going to get it? What do you think it should be? And what do you think we should do with it?
I believe our governor recently poo-pooed the motion for that. So that's a very sad day for California. All my California Democrats out there should be very sad. For me personally, I believe in land, family, and sovereignty. Those are my three principles. And so, again, as someone who is multiracial, someone who looks out of the box a lot, I feel as the only remedy for America's atrocity of slavery is to give us use the I would say reparation, but for lack of a better word, but reparation model for the Native American people. We need land. We need our families to be left alone, to be kept intact, and we need to be able to move with sovereignty. Other than that, we're going to be continuing on this same trajectory of disillusionment and getting nothing for our blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah, I always struggle trying to come up with the dollar amount. And so I think similar to Kyle, just in the sense of what do we need to sustain ourselves? And I do think some form of access to land. I would like to see that movement in solidarity, though, with our Native American brothers and sisters, and because they, in their land back movement, they're calling for reparations. And so I want to make sure they get their land first. This is their home. And then, how do we work it out together as we've always have kind of worked together? The other part is, I hear about culture, but to me, culture is so important as far as resilience, protective, and that tapping into that spirituality. I practice, of course, indigenous African belief system. And so dance and music, and when we call Odu, or when we call our for lack of a better word, our Bible verses, that, and bringing and invoking that spirit, that is what propels me to do the work that I do. And I want to be left alone and be able to do that without fear, repercussions, or, laws that make certain things illegal. In Skid Row, I'm working in homelessness policy in LA and in Santa Monica. At one point, the police made it illegal for folks to drum inside of one of the parks. Yeah. But that is our tapping into that spirituality. So to me, it's preserving our culture, and being left alone. It's having that access to land. It is recognizing our family and doing some deep healing circles and having the resources to do that. Talk therapy is good, but there are other healing modalities that we have. And how do we just, on par, be able to do those? And people, there's funding and resources and access to space for all of that. So I guess it's this idea of being outside of an assimilated culture and being able to express yourself without fear of someone always trying to put you into a box. Yeah, that's what. And I would say this is just heavy for me. A colleague of mine died by suicide last week. And he was an educator, bright African-American guy. And I remember when we work together, the kind of conversations we would have and trying to navigate, how do you navigate leadership in kind of white spaces and the pressure that that puts on you when you're trying to be, you know what's right. And it's like, as soon as you feel that sense of liberation and, you know, because of your position or your status and you're able to make decision, the system just tries to put you back into this place. And I won't even try to define what that is. And so to me, reparations is getting to be who you are without all these conditions that are constantly placed on you and that you have to navigate because it's exhausting.
Yeah, I hear that. There's definitely that mental health component, right? I've listened to a couple of symposiums down south, and in addition to money, in addition to land, free education, that mental health component is really huge. I would add a type of connection throughout the diaspora, right? Because we do have cousins in the Caribbean, right? And we do have family on the continent. And as long as we have the experience of being minorities and being the outliers and being the other, I think that that's something that should absolutely be addressed and absolutely connecting with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. So thank you for bringing that up. All right, let's talk about generational wealth, and let's make it a little local. Okay. Santa Monica is constantly dealing with two issues, right? Affordable housing and homelessness. Housing, I would say, would be a really important piece in terms of reparations because there was so many communities of Black people who owned land, who had, you know, our own schools, our own churches, our own communities, thriving communities. And here comes the city or the government with eminent domain, right? And for example, the 10 freeway, right? So this, where we are right now, was in the past a thriving Black community. And there is a history that the 10 freeway, this was the area where the 10 freeway was built, and it completely destroyed the Belmar community. So actually, we're going to go talk about generational wealth. So when we have stories like that, and we have stories like, you know, our experience of being these bridge millennials, I was in 81, I was born, and 81 is when the crack epidemic hit, you know, so you had thriving communities that were destroyed. You had, you know, a lot of the men imprisoned. A lot of people died. And we still, if you drive through South Central, right, where my grandparents lived in Watts on 92nd and Avalon all of my life. And I saw as a child that community completely change and it hasn't been rebuilt in a way that was for the Black families and communities that were there. So how do we address in 2023 the generational wealth gap that exists given that history of many of the things that have happened? And this is open to everybody.
So going back to slavery, they were not farmers. They did not receive pay. So free labor helped to build this country, helped to build millionaires. It helped to build generational wealth. And I remember a few years ago, I read an article, and it said something about Black households and white households and how many centuries it would take for Black households to catch up with white households. What gave that privilege? The institution of slavery. When you look at people who are in Mississippi, plantation owners, can you imagine during that time period, they were millionaires. They were millionaires in Mississippi. Now Mississippi is one of the poorest states in the nation, right?
Okay.
So when we're talking about generational wealth, it's always going to go back to that peculiar institution known as slavery. It's going to go back to the people who were, 1865, they had nothing but the tattered clothes on their backs, maybe some shoes or not. They did not have the 40 acres and a mule and so on and so forth, right? So that land theme that keeps coming up is very significant in regards to African-American progress as well as wealth that could be passed down from generation to generation. Also, what I think is very important too, and it's been in the news, erase the student loan debt. Why is that on hold? That would not just benefit African-Americans, that would benefit all of society. That would benefit all of society. So there are things that can be done now that would help African Americans, but also greater society in regards to our policy and practices. And so education, and something else I want to say in regards to education, as we're looking at all the book bans and so on and so forth in this country, literacy was so very important, and you could lose your life if you knew how to read or write. You could lose your life if you knew how to read or write, to debunk and to leave this peculiar institution of slavery. And I want to also, because we haven't said her name, but I really have to give a shout out to Harriet Tubman, the original Afrofuturist who envisioned a future of freedom. So for me, coming from the standpoint of education, it's so very important to know where we've come from, but it's also very important to understand where we are today in regards to literacy and access to knowledge. And those same slaveholding states who forbid people to learn to read or write are now using that same policy and practice with banning books. Many of them are African American in orientation. I'm glad to know today that the state of Illinois, the governor, has a ban on book bans. Let's give it up. A ban on book bans, right? Because I know we're talking, about the African-American experience, but I also want to say this book ban has also been related to our sisters and brothers and trans people, queer people. Book bans have been impacting us all. And so I want to acknowledge that, because you asked me about critical race theory, and a part of critical race theory is intersectionality. And a part of that looks at oppression and various types of oppression. And I just want to acknowledge also the pain and suffering that our queer, trans, BIPOC people and beyond go through on a daily basis in this country.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you. I crossed off one of the other questions. Thank you. We've absolutely seen race history, sexual orientation, and gender. Any books with those themes in the school year of 2022 and 2023 have been banned in school libraries across the nation. So thank you for addressing that. I want to ask one more question to Elisa about addressing the generational wealth gap. Is affordable housing going to fix it?
I think ownership of housing will fix it. Okay. That's one of the things, and I get it that, especially here in LA, because housing is so unaffordable and access to land is so unaffordable, there's been this big push of increasing rental market. But when I think about rental housing, and again, just seeing this in my own generation of not being able to afford housing, so I'm renting. But especially when you're Black and the history of displacement, just change ownerships and all of a sudden you're displaced. Like the level of anxiety I know I have in my apartment building is rent controlled and everything, but it was, built in 1968 or something. It's still affordable. And I'm just waiting for the day to get the notice that someone wants to buy it and turn it into condos, because where will I go? And so affordable access to housing affordability is the way. And if there's a way to bring back, in the 1990s, we had many first-time home buyer programs, especially across the country, not so much here in LA, but in other parts of the country, of bringing those programs back, because there's a sense of safety and security when you own a home. Anyone, families that are in need could come into your house. If you're renting now, you only have, 14 days for someone to visit. And what if you're trying to take in your niece or nephew because their mama went to jail or were hospitalized? Now they're facing child welfare because you have a housing policy that says you can't take in this kin or senior housing, et cetera. So to me, it's the access to housing affordability. And I really think we just need to relook at this housing model, if it's cooperative housing, if it's, I don't know, shared land or leasing land or something. But I think our housing model, we really have to look at it differently.
Yeah, and you bring up a really interesting point, and you and I had talked about this yesterday, I think it was. The idea of multi-generational living, right? We go so much further together, but when it comes to affordable housing, we're discouraged from having multiple generations live in a household. And then culturally, I find that as Black people, we don't necessarily, well, I don't know if this is an LA thing, Kyle. Maybe it's an LA thing. Maybe it's an LA, our generational thing, right? But what we used to do, where multiple generations would help each other, aunts and uncles were like moms and dads, grandmothers and grandfathers lived in the house all together. We don't have that model as prevalent, at least in California, at least in LA. And I think that is something that culturally we can address. We can help to restore. Because when you're paying $2,000, $2,500, $3,000 to live in a 1-bedroom or, one bath apartment in any city, we could actually do so much better if our families are together and we can buy a home. And I find that is what other communities do, namely immigrant communities, and they're able to be successful and pass it on from family to family to family. But somewhere along the way, our Black families stopped doing that.
And I was going to say, because it did happen in LA, growing up, just for me, it was like I was telling Rafina yesterday, when I would come out of school, I went to Coliseum School in South LA, and I would just kind of look, because I didn't know who was picking me up that day. It was auntie or uncle or somebody, and on the weekends. And then even my babysitter who lived off of Normandy was from Louisiana, and it was all you knew was auntie and uncle. You didn't know who exactly was in the room or in the back house, but it was as people came up from the South, they were able to live together until they were able to, get themselves together, or even children or grandchildren. I think one of the biggest thing, again, going back to housing policy, was our preference for single family zoning. And when we started making boarding homes illegal. And so we're saying only one family, one nuclear family, mom, dad, kids, and however you define that, should be able to live in the house. You shouldn't be able to rent out rooms or share rooms. And I think that really hurt. And in homeless policy, we got rid of transitional housing as a model. So transitional housing is like a 2-year program to help people transition from the streets into permanent housing. Many Black property owners ran transitional housing for veterans or for people with disability or seniors. And again, when we stopped funding that model, they started losing those properties. And those properties were bought by developers or other investors. So we lost that transfer generation. But it's shocking to me how I'm 50, well, I'll be 51 tomorrow. 51. Thank you. But no, but the point is, in a generation between 51 and 41, what the heck happened that fast? And that's the part that's scary to me.
Yeah.
And I'll take the birthday.
Okay, afterwards, when we're eating pastries. Oh, you have a birthday twin. Okay, we're singing with birthday pastries. Okay, because singing is good for your mental health. Okay, and celebration and joy. And I love where we are in the conversation right now, because we're talking about, yes, policy and all of those things, but there's also things that we can do, right, to further liberate ourselves. So I want to talk about mental health for a minute. Healthcare is very expensive in this country. But you know what's free? Going outside and taking a walk, being in nature. And this is an area that this is his get down. Right? So I want to just give you a chance to talk about access to open spaces for Black folks that affects our mental health. And yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. Yeah. So for most of us here in Southern California, particularly in Los Angeles, we're in an urban environment all the time. I know growing up for me, my idea of going into nature was going to the beach. You know what I mean? And just sitting there at the beach and playing in the sand and not going too far in the water. But there's so much that we have to offer here in Southern California, from mountains to desert. And taking someone who spends most of their time in this concrete environment full of hard lines and right angles, and you go into a natural setting, it has a physical effect on you, and it has a mental effect on you, and spiritual all around. And again, taking ourselves out of that environment, the rat race that we're in, it helps us. It helps our mind relax. Like, being here and working 10 hours a day and driving 2 hours a day and taking care of your kids, it causes your mind to just crumple up. And you have to find a piece of meditation somewhere. For me in particular, it's outdoors. And what I do with Urban Saddles is give that to the community. We like to work with inner city youth and introduce them to animal husbandry, again, outdoor experiences, hiking, camping. And you see that the children don't need to be in front of the screen all day. Like, these are like false problems we create for ourselves. I feel like, especially for our young Black men, it's incredibly necessary. Like, you're not supposed to be sitting down all day playing video games or coloring or, sitting up there with your mom. You're supposed to be getting dirty and roughhousing and things like that. It's good for us. It's very, very good for us, all people, but particularly young Black men. Someone said it in this time, I think it was yourself, after second grade, we're seen as a threat.
Yeah.
So, if that's the case, in every situation you're in, they're going to file down your teeth and your horns. They're going to want you to soften up. But when you go out, you can be yourself. There's nobody around you. You can go and cry and scream and yell and run and jump and do everything we need to do. With the horses and animals, I'm just an animal person, period. I love animals. With them, you get to connect to a much more primal piece of yourself. And connecting with your fellow brothers and sisters outside is a wonderful thing. You get to see people's real self, going on a hike and they're complaining about bugs. You get to see where people are their problem solving skills in real time. And I highly recommend nature for all of us. And get out, especially if you're here. All of our Southern California listeners, and people in the audience, go out. It's necessary. It's so necessary, and we have some of the best environments in the whole world that you can explore.
And I just want to say, as someone turning 50 this year, I still color. Let's give it up for coloring. Ain't nothing wrong with coloring sometimes. I just have to say that. That clears the mind. Let's doodle a little bit.
And she does have some books with her. As you know, she's an artist, and so she'll tell you about those in a little bit. This is the last question before we go to the audience for Q&A. And then at the end, we'll give the panel an opportunity to give you their closing remarks. But I feel like you guys just started to address it, right? So given all that we've talked about, our history, right? Our path, our journey, our struggles, our triumphs. Here we are in 2023. And while it can be exhausting, there's so much that we have within us that helps us to continue to move forward, to survive and thrive and create. And art is my get down, right? Like I said, the drums, the music, there's just, that's my home, right? Even without being able to trace my family line very far, and without being able to say how far back, generations my family is exactly from this place, I find home in the fact that when I feel there's an energy as a Black person, as a person of color, as a Black woman, that I just feel. And I think that we know what it is, right? It's not even really tangible. It's hard to describe. But when I hear music from any part of the diaspora, and when I feel the vibration with people from various parts of the diaspora, that's my central piece. That's my home. And dance and the drum is my the way to walk through that portal, so that I can survive this society as a Black woman with 2 Black sons. So I just want to ask you, as artists, I know you guys are artists, educators, what have you tapped into? And this is for people in the audience as well as people who are watching online. What has been your thing to help you get through, right? What's your passion? What do you look to? What keeps you going? Yeah.
For me in particular, it has been mythology. And Dr. Elisa, I think you graduated from Pacifica University. My personal hero is Joseph Campbell. And that's he has a college there, so that's a place I'd like to attend. Maybe you'll see me there. Maybe be alumni, right? You know what I'm saying?
Contact. You see them contacts?
For me, again, story, narrative, and the hero's journey has been a great thing. And a lot of the problems I think we have in society, personal problems, psychological problems, mental health, a lot of issues could be solved with self-reflection and things like that, going on, understanding that you're a self-sustained individual human being at this point as an adult, and what are you going to do with that? Also, again, nature has been incredibly helpful, but ultimately you're going to have to find your own path in this rat race that's going to keep you sane and healthy, both sane and healthy, because although coloring may be wonderful, it ain't burning no calories. I'm gonna say that.
Don't come for her
I'm
coloring.
gonna say that. So
Don't come for me unless you want all the smoke.
I want all of it.
Get ready.
But I say again, no one's. That's for me. That's what I love. No one's can tell you what it is. Just with Buddhism and the Buddha can give you the Eightfold Path to get you to the jumping off point, but he can't tell you how to jump off. No one can tell you how to jump off. So in that, how are you going to find your own peace? Because we're in an individualistic society now, so you have to maintain that in order to create the umbrella for the people and save. If you don't save yourself, you can't save anyone else.
I just want to say, in reflecting about Juneteenth and some of the themes, the resilience of a people. And so for me, I think about that strength. It's not a day that goes by that I don't think about what the ancestors went through in this country. So when I reflect upon what did they go through, okay, so it's slavery, it's Reconstruction, it's Jim Crow, it is the Civil Rights Movement, it's the Black Panther Party, it's the Black Arts Movement, it's surviving or trying to survive Reaganomics, it's the era of Black Lives Matter, it is gentrification, it is redlining, it's going into that bank where you get that loan, right? Well, you get that job based on how your name sounds. So I think about the historical, and I also think about the contemporary. How far have we come? There's still work to be done. but I also stand on those shoulders. And I never forget the incredible price that they have paid for me to be here to even speak to this crowd in Santa Monica. And so I give thanks. I give thanks every day. And also I want to give a shout out to gospel.
Hey.
How we got over. How I got over, as Aretha Franklin would put it. And so I listen to those types of songs, those field hollers, those work songs, the spirituals, the gospel, their testimony, their words of encouragement. And so that's what inspires me, and it moves me forward in the work that I do.
Come on now with the hope and the tools.
No, I would say for myself, it's slowing down and having spaces of reverie. I just I made it through on the other side of breast cancer. And it was a real question of like, thank you. It's a family journey. But what it made me think about was, what is my own will to live? Like, why I'm still here? Why? What does that mean? I was like, and sometimes I was like, wait, I'm still here? Wait, like what? I'm on this other side. What am I supposed to do? And I realized it's this tapping into this space of reverie. So it could be a walk outside at the beach or at the park, or I go to an annual women's retreat, and it's in Tennessee, and we out in the woods. And yes, I am scared of the ticks and the snakes, but we work it out. But it's that regeneration, and then also in that space of reverie, writing, and just allowing myself from like ancient times, whoever I was in multiple lifetimes back, or even going forward, just allow that to come out, and kind of that mytho-narrative writing, so I remember who I am and hold that in the sacred space within inside of me. And then, of course, dancing and all that, too.
Ashe. Ashe.
And coloring.
Ashe. Ashe.
And poetry.
Ashe. And cooking my granny's recipes. So this is the time that we have for Q&A. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, our elder in the room. Would you like to come to the microphone? If you have a question, is there a number two? Are there more? Come. Yes.
My name is Jerry Rubin,
Hi, Jerry.
and as you know, I'll be 80 in December.
Happy birthday.
Originally from Philadelphia, came out here on July 4th, 1967. I love Santa Monica. My wife, Marissa, and our therapist recently died from pancreatic cancer. The
Blessings.
city planted a tree in her memory, and I wish she were here. I just wanted to say, I think there's so much more that has to be done, but I do want to acknowledge that we have made strides, and I want to particularly put it out to this beautiful young black man here, because it took so long with people not giving up, making strides, whether it be the women's movement, the civil war. And so we have to give that credit. I was beat up by police, not Santa Monica police. LA police officers almost blinded me many decades ago. It's a long story. Beat up by the highway patrol on a motorcycle trip in Balmaria, Texas. I've had my share, but I just was a graduate of the 10-week police academy training here, and I found out firsthand we have a wonderful police force, a wonderful city council, city staff, good people. We managed to keep a AAA bond rating, promote environmentalism, promote cultural diversity, and do what we can in the face of craziness that's happening. I don't want to get too political, but with Trump and the QAnon people and the crazy neo-Nazis and racist people, we need to band together and build on everything. I am honored that we're back in the Martin Luther King Auditorium after this COVID stuff, and we couldn't come back together again. And I just want to say, me and my wife founded a group years ago called the Activist Support Circle, which is the nation's first emotional support group for progressive activists, where we could sit and share our fears and frustrations so we don't burn out, and also share our hopes and aspirations. I want to get that restarted again and continue to build on everything because, I'm getting up there and I want to see that we're not going to go backwards, but we're going to continue to go forwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Audrey. I just want to thank you so much for this event. I moved here 3 months ago from New York City, and just it's the first day I've felt like home. It's great to be here in this room.
Welcome.
I was a little worried about Santa Monica, and now I'm a little less worried. I grew up in Virginia, and I just wanted to thank you for the Juneteenth history. We were taught in my neighborhood in this small town in Virginia that Juneteenth was when the Union soldiers came through Albemarle County in Virginia and let them know. This is the first I'd heard of Galveston. So I'm glad, and I'll do more research, and thank you for teaching me, and I want to find out the real story. But I'm also in a way, it's kind of beautiful that the people I grew up with had claimed it as their own holiday. And so I think it probably happened in a lot of places. Well, they believe it happened in a lot of places, and I wonder if you could just talk about that.
It did. I just want to thank you for that point. So in different parts of the nation, they learned at different times, but the people in Galveston learned last, right? And so in certain parts of the country, it wasn't even known as Juneteenth. Sometimes it was known as Jubilee Day. So just know, to validate what you've said here, that there are other parts of the nation that celebrate Juneteenth or Jubilee Day, but they also found out at different increments.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Chene N. George Barnes, and I'm a United States Federal Marshal, CIAC 2. I'm also a state and federal land proprietress here in Santa Monica, and I'm also a Santa Monica PD Vice. So I've been associated with this high level of acclimates for over 37 years. I hear a lot of different stories. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I hear a lot of different stories, and I'm out actually on a federal land duty now. So I hear a lot of different stories about a lot of the attributes and some of the things that we're still venturing through as far as trying to improve the community. How effective is it with PTA, also in youth, cultural groups, as well as neighborhood watches?
Thank you.
And PTA, Parent Teacher Association. I think the more engagement with community and showing up, giving voice, influencing just programs or policies or directions or feedback is so critical. And I think in so many ways we've lost it. Some just capacity because people have to work 2 or 3 jobs, so who has time to attend meetings? But those of us who can, I think it's so important. It's the bedrock of our community. So I support those, any form of community engagement that's authentic and where people, their voices will really be heard and they can have that impact, I think is important.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Florine Williams. I am an artist. I was put here on this earth to sing, dance, and color.
Come on now. And color.
And this question is actually about the multi-generational wealth theme or the intergenerational wealth theme. And with the intention or the motivation of intergenerational wealth, I want y'all to dream with me a little bit. What would you do if you were given an acre of land tomorrow? What would you do with that? And so we can go this way.
Oh, go ahead, Panel.
Go, because I have my plan laid out. I would build a retreat center, multi-generational retreat center that would have a banquet hall, that would have private cabins, that would have land dedicated, like a garden plot dedicated to the ancestors and a garden. And it would be right on the lake, in my mind, right on the lake where we can go out and do some ceremony. But I would have it drawn. I'll show you a picture afterward.
Well, I grew up on the farm with my grandmother, and so I'm used to working the land. So for me, it would be plant as many fruits and vegetables and things, and then tell our people, because I noticed that here in LA, it's really interesting coming from the agrarian South and moving to Los Angeles 26 years ago and seeing people who are hungry, seeing people who are homeless. So ironically, I rented a patch of land over here at the Venice Learning Gardens, and I grew a garden of greens, and I ended up giving those greens away. So with an acre of land, I would grow as much natural organic food as possible and give it to the people.
Oh gosh, with an acre of land, I'd spread out with all my family and animals and live the American dream. You know, I think the American dream is still very attainable and alive and should be cultivated. So I'd live it up. I'd live it up, build my house, build my barn, have my corral there. And my people are all always welcome, you know, live this expansive dream we have here, the capabilities we have for the first time in generations.
That's such an interesting question, because I am working with my good sister in Barbados, and we're building an organization called the Sankofa Wellness Project. And you can look that up on Instagram. And we're actually looking at getting land in Barbados, so that we can build an exchange program we'll grow food, we'll have animal husbandry. And because I have these young boys and I'm looking at how the economy is changing and the world is changing with technology and AI, I'm really focused on our youth returning to technical trades and learning carpentry and painting and plumbing and solar technology. So I'm also building a program for that. So we're looking at developing that in Barbados, like as right now. But in terms of land here, I haven't thought of that. But ideally, what we want is to have land here, land in the Caribbean, land on the continent, so that our youth can travel to each place and again reconnect the diaspora through and reframe their education through actual travel excursions. So thank you for placing that in my subconscious. Okay, I want land here too. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, and we'll do last question.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. My name is Deborah Shepard. I am the first Black person to be a member of the Special Education District Advisory Committee in the school district, and I'm the first Black chair of that committee.
Hey.
And I'm the first Black person to be the Community Advisory Chair.
Come on now.
Education.
Come on now. Bust through them doors. Yes.
It's because of my own life experience, my own family experience, it's become my life's work to help people who are disabled. And I'm very concerned about the intersectionality of Blackness and disability, because a lot of Black people who have disabilities are not able to access the services that are needed. I got a call today about a Black person that we know, a Black male who's been missing for several days, who has a mental illness. And I'm holding my breath, praying that I don't get a call about that person having left this world. So I think what I'm concerned about, what I'm asking everyone here to do, the city of Santa Monica has had a conversation going on recently about behavioral health. There's a survey online. If you live in Santa Monica, please take that survey. Please give your feedback. Please write to our council members, because we need behavioral health services in this community. We need that. We need to be able to allow our Black people to access services, because we are the last on the list when it comes to accessing mental and behavioral health care. So that's all I wanted to say.
And I thank you for that. Thank you, everyone who had a question and a comment. Yes, Dr. Amina wants to share some information with us.
So I'm a teacher too, and I train teachers and have been training teachers for decades in South Los Angeles and beyond. I have 5 or 6 books for children, children's picture books. So Juneteenth, celebrating the end of slavery in the United States. And we want to also acknowledge Ms. Opal Lee, who was very instrumental in helping to make this a federal holiday. But if you want to see some of the books after our panel ends, I'm willing to share what I have with you, and hopefully you will share the knowledge with the children in your lives.
Thank you. We do encourage you to stay. There's an opportunity for networking and socializing, connecting. There's food outside. We're not done yet. Hold on. So I just want to make the announcement. So there's food outside by Cafe Rousseau.
Provided the pastries.
Yes.
The loaf bread, and then there's veggies, fruit, all kinds of stuff. And then we have 3 vendors out there that have been, they started setting up about 3:30. So please stop by and connect with them as well.
Okay. Do they take Venmo, Cash App, Zelle?
That I do not know.
Okay.
We'll find out.
Okay, because we want you to support the businesses, yes? Economic empowerment. We also, I just want to make an announcement before they wrap up, that this Saturday, the Juneteenth festivities continue. There's going to be our 31st annual Juneteenth festival at the Virginia Avenue Park in the city of Santa Monica. So I just want to give the city of Santa Monica some kudos, some praise for being the city to have been honoring and bringing people to the city to celebrate Juneteenth for 31 years. So we should give the city. And again, Dr. Amina will have a booth there because she's an artist.
Yeah, hold on.
Hello.
Black and Pride. Black and Proud in honor of Juneteenth and Pride. So it's a portraiture from the African diaspora in celebration of Pride and Juneteenth.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Yay! Okay, so in closing, I just want to ask our panelists for any closing remarks. We want to think of the people in the room, think of the people online, and think of people who are going to be watching this in the future for many years to come. What would you like to leave our audience with in terms of Juneteenth, emancipation, looking back at where we've been so that we can keep going where we're going together? So I want to start with Kyle.
All right, I'll start off. I'd like to leave the world with a message that course correction is highly necessary. Although it is very easy to congratulate ourselves and say that we've made many strides, in all honesty, we have less wealth than we did 50 years ago. And so I encourage my younger brothers and sisters to think outside the box, to read between the lines, to question everything, and to understand that you are targeted and to move accordingly in this world.
I would say Juneteenth is for everyone, and I'm sure that all of us can connect to the theme of family and community and coming together. I would also say that restorative justice, I'm a fan of restorative justice, and we're seeing it in public policies. I think you've already mentioned the 10 freeway and the displacement. There's Bruce's Beach. We know about that too as well. So I'm very hopeful, as we move forth in the future. And like I said, we can all connect to the theme of Juneteenth when we think about our ancestors and the incredible strides that they have made. That's why we're here today. So that's what I would want to leave you with.
I would want to leave you with remembering the footprints of those that have gone before us, but finding your own meaning for life. My niece is here visiting, and we have these conversations about AI and just different generations, and it's so easy to have all these outside influences tell you who you are, but find those moments in nature or in dance or in art to really get to know who you are authentically. And that, I think, is the most grounding thing in the way that we can honor those that made different choices so that we could be here today.
Beautiful.
And thank you all for coming and listening to us too.
And I want to leave you all with just the reminder that Black history is American history. And that as we process through this, as we talk through this, that we all play a part in how we move forward together, right? And so there's reconciliation, there's restoration, there's looking within, there's being honest about where we've been, right? And as we have these honest, open conversations, we can actually truly form a path forward together, because at the end of the day, we're all Americans. Anywhere you go, you try moving somewhere else today, and after you're in your 30s, 40s, or 50s, you always gonna be American, right? And so I want to acknowledge the artists and the people who have just made this culture so rich. One of them in particular, I want to acknowledge Stevie Wonder, who said, through lots of a movement to.
May I have your attention, please? The library will be closing in 30 minutes. The second floor, the bedroom, will be closing in 15 minutes. Once again, the library will be closing in 30 minutes.
But we lost
The
that.
second floor,
So they're just, everybody online is disconnected now.
Okay.
We just lost it.
Okay.
Laverne Ross.
Okay. Okay. So we want to honor. So Stevie Wonder, who worked with the community, and they helped to make Martin Luther King his birthday a holiday. And as part of that commemoration, he created a new birthday song, which we about to sing to the birthday twins. So everybody 5, 6, happy birthday to ya. Happy birthday to ya. Happy birthday, okay, all right. So, and we have to, again, acknowledge our elders, a living legend in Santa Monica, Miss Laverne Ross, who goes to every Juneteenth festival because she brought it to Santa Monica. Have you all met, you and Miss Laverne? So you guys got to meet, because I know you have a history also of helping to bring Juneteenth to the city of Santa Monica. So we just want everybody to say, hey, Miss Laverne. Hi, Miss Laverne. Right? And so thank you. Remember, there are refreshments outside. There's birthday pastries. And we look forward to seeing you guys on Saturday celebrating Juneteenth at the festival at Virginia Avenue Park. Yay!